God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Now, in the sermon or homily I delivered at Christmas, I said then that St. Luke tells us that Jesus was born in the reign of the self-described Caesar Augustus. He ascribed himself as being divine. But Matthew tells us that the wise men were looking for the divine Redeemer of the world in the time of King Herod, who claimed to be the Redeemer of the children of Israel. So therein is the irony of these characters in whose reigns these events occurred. Now, these wise men were probably religious philosophers who were seekers of the truth. And their journey is a reminder, really, of the journey of Abraham, who also traveled from his homeland to an unknown destination led by God. Now, these travelers, the wise men and Abraham, are really symbols of all those who are drawn by God to enter into a relationship with him. Now, Psalm 72, which we've just read, verse 10, describes foreign kings bringing gifts and falling prostrate before God's king in Israel. So you can see how these wise men morphed over time into kings in the tradition of the church. Well, whoever they are, they represent the Gentile people being drawn by Jesus, the true Israel, into the worship of Israel's God. And Jesus would fulfill the mission that the children of Israel had been given but had failed to achieve, and that is to draw all men, Gentiles, into the worship of God. So Matthew tells us that they followed a star. Now, astrologers tell us that it might have been the conjunction of Juniper, Saturn, and Mars that actually occurred in 7 BC, or 6 or 7 BC. I mean, who knows? But the point is that these followers headed towards Jerusalem, the city of God, the city of David's throne, in order to seek advice. In other words, they traveled to the very center of the people of Israel. Of course, it was the obvious thing to do, to go to Jerusalem, if they were looking for a new king of the Jews. Now, what's interesting about what they said, we are looking for the king of the Jews, is that was not the normal description that the Jews would use of themselves. They always talked about the king of Israel. But the wise men said they were searching for the king of the Jews. Now, Matthew, in his gospel, tells us that this visit caused Herod, quote, and all Jerusalem to be disturbed. The only other time Matthew uses that exact phrase is when Jesus rode into Jerusalem on a donkey, the royal beast of King David, on Palm Sunday. And the only other time Matthew uses the phrase King of the Jews is when Jesus faced Pilate, and Pilate asked him if that is who he was. So these wise men and the story surrounding them provide hints that Jesus is God's Redeemer. And they give us hints or shadows of how that redemption is to be obtained. Now, the visit of these wise men to Herod caused him to be disturbed. In other words, he was threatened. And like all threatened, self-centered individuals, he reacted by destroying what he saw as being the cause of the disturbance of his own agenda. Namely, he slaughtered innocent babies with the sword. So it's no surprise that the holy innocents in modern times have become linked to the tragedy of unnecessary abortion in those instances where pregnancy is considered to be a disturbance to the mother's life. But on arrival in Bethlehem, the wise men are full of joy because they have found the one who has drawn them to himself. Here is God's Messiah, the servant king, the good shepherd of all people. And the wise men fall down. They prostrate themselves before the Christ child, not so much in obeisance to a greater monarch than they are, not in humility or as an act of homage, but they fall down in order to worship. Note the order. Worship first, and then they handed over their gifts. And ask yourself whether that order has somehow been reversed or one of the elements has been missed out in the modern day celebrations. Well, the gifts, of course, that they brought were totally impractical. I mean, they did not bring casseroles, baby food, or nappy whites. The gifts they brought were gold for a human king, incense for the divine God, and myrrh of suffering and protection against death. The fascination about the myrrh was, of course, it was never used. Because when the women came to the tomb to complete the burial rituals on Easter Day, when they would have used the myrrh, Jesus had been raised to new life. So life for us may be a journey, not a destination. But the end of all our exploring is to share the risen life with the Christ child that the wise men were drawn to worship. Wise men still are. So let us thank God for them, and let them be our inspiration, never to give up on our journey with and to the Christ.